The Ukrainian steppe, late summer, 1943, the great thunder of Operation Citadel has faded, leaving behind a silence that is heavy and thick. The air is a cocktail of scents. Damp earth, crushed grass, the acrid tang of cordite, and the underlying sweetness of decay. A landscape of churned mud and blackened craters stretches to the horizon, and in the middle of it all a Titan rests, a Tiger I tank, its imposing, slab-sided hull settled heavily into the mire. Its 88mm gun, once the arbiter of death at long ranges, is now elevated towards a vacant sky, its menace neutered, the complex interlocking. Armor plates designed to deflect Soviet shells are scarred with impacts, but none fatal. The hatch is open, swinging gently in the breeze. The crew is long gone, captured or killed. The only sign of their departure is a single battered metal canister, kicked over the mud, its sides stenciled with the stark black cross of the Wehrmacht. It is empty. This colossus of steel, a beast of unparalleled power, was not slain in combat. It was simply abandoned, its heart stilled by a lack of the very fuel that was its lifeblood. This silent sentinel on the steppe was the embodiment of a devastating paradox. Weapon born from fear and engineered for dominance, yet shackled to a supply chain that was already breaking down. The Tiger tank was not born from a cool, calculated military doctrine, but from the white-hot shock of combat. The year is 1941. Operation Barbarossa, the Nazi invasion of the Soviet Union, was meant to be a swift, decisive crusade. In the beginning, it seemed it would be German panzer divisions, led by the capable Panzer IIIs and IVs, sliced through Soviet formations, achieving staggering encirclements. But then, in the forests and marshes of Russia, new monsters began to appear. They were the Soviet T and the KV-1. To the German infantryman and tanker, these machines were a revelation, and a terrifying one. The T's sloped armor, a simple yet brilliant design, caused German anti-tank rounds to glance off harmlessly. Its wide tracks allowed it to glide over mud and snow that immobilized German vehicles. The KV-1 was a moving fortress, nearly impervious to standard German tank and anti-tank guns at anything but point-blank range. Reports filtered back of a single KV-1 holding up an entire German division for day, absorbing hit after hit without succumbing, a profound sense of technological inferiority. A Panzerkraftschlag or tank shock swept through the German ranks. The myth of German technological invincibility was shattered on the vast Russian plains. These reports reached the highest levels of command, and they found a particularly receptive audience in Adolf Hitler himself. The Führer was a man obsessed with big, powerful, and psychologically overwhelming weapons. He demanded an immediate response, a direct counter to this Soviet armor. In a meeting at the Wolf's Lair in the spring of 1942, he issued a direct and uncompromising order. Germany must have a new heavy tank. It must be armed with a high-velocity gun capable of destroying any enemy tank at long range. It must be protected by armor so thick that no Allied weapon could penetrate it from the front. It must be a weapon that would not only dominate the battlefield but also terrorize the enemy, a Wunderwaffe, a wonder weapon. This directive bypassed the more cautious Army Ordnance Office and set in motion a frantic design and development race. The project to create a 45-ton Panzer had been simmering since 1937, but now it was a top priority, and the specifications grew ever more demanding, pushing the limits of German engineering. The weight requirement soon ballooned to over 50 tons, a staggering figure for the time, driven by Hitler's personal insistence on ever thicker armor. This single-minded focus on offensive and defensive power would come to define the vehicle, creating a masterpiece of firepower and protection, but one that was conceived with little regard for the practical realities of moving it across the vast, unforgiving landscapes of the Eastern Front. This relentless push for a battlefield titan set the stage for a corporate and engineering duel between two of Germany's most brilliant and egotistical designers. The responsibility to answer Hitler's call fell to two rival firms, Henschel and Son, a stalwart of German heavy industry, and the Porsche KG, the design bureau of the brilliant but often impractical visionary Ferdinand Porsche. The competition was as much about ego as it was about engineering. Porsche, enjoying a close personal relationship with Hitler, was supremely confident. His design, the VK45.01P, was characteristically unorthodox. It used a petrol-electric drive system, twin gasoline engines powering generators that drove electric motors connected to the tracks. It was a complex and elegant solution in theory, offering smooth acceleration and easy steering, but it was a logistical nightmare requiring vast amounts of copper, a critical war material Germany could ill afford. Its torsion bar suspension was also intricate and vulnerable to Eastern Front mud. Erwin Aders, the lead designer for Henschel, took a more pragmatic approach. His VK 45.01H was a less revolutionary but more robust design. It utilized a conventional, though powerful, 700 horsepower Maybach HL 210 petrol engine mated to a complex pre-selector transmission. Its suspension system was a masterpiece of practical engineering. Interleaved road wheels, a double row of overlapping wheels that distributed the tank's colossal weight more evenly and provided a smoother ride, while this system would later prove to be a maintenance horror in icy or muddy conditions. It was a calculated solution to the immediate problem of mobility. The armor was not sloped like the T-34's, but was instead thick vertical plate, a direct response to the specification for maximum protection, relying on sheer thickness rather than clever angling to defeat enemy shells. The climax of this corporate battle was set for April 20, 1942, Hitler's birthday, at his headquarters in Rastenburg. Both prototypes were put through their paces. The Porsche Tiger, for all its theoretical advantages, was plagued by mechanical teething troubles. In its voracious appetite for scarce resources, the Henschel prototype, while not without its flaws, was demonstrably more reliable and easier to produce. Hitler was impressed by the sheer power of both, but the Army's pragmatists won the day. The Henschel design was selected for mass production. It was officially designated the Panzerkampfwagen VI Tiger Ausf. But to the world, it would simply be known as the Tiger. And at the heart of this 57-ton behemoth was its true soul, the 8.8 cm KWK 36L56 gun. This was not a repurposed anti-aircraft gun, but a weapon derived from the legendary Flak 1836, purpose-built for the tank. It was a weapon of terrifying accuracy and power. Its tungsten-cored APCR rounds could slice through over 120 m of armor at 1,000 meters, making every Allied tank in service in 1942 and most of 1943 utterly obsolete. The Tiger could engage and destroy its enemies from distances at which they were effectively blind and harmless. It was a sniper's rifle housed in a moving fortress. The first Tigers rolled off the Henschel assembly line in Kassel in August 1942, their dark gray paint still fresh, their crews filled with a potent mixture of pride and apprehension. They were about to be unleashed near Leningrad, and the legend of the invincible Tiger was about to be born. This marriage of immense firepower and formidable armor, however, came with a Faustian bargain, a set of profound and inherent weaknesses that would become apparent the moment it left the proving grounds. This leads us directly into the multiple, conflicting angles of the Tiger's story, beginning with its terrifying technological prowess. In the pure clinical language of ballistics and armor penetration, the Tiger I was a masterpiece of overmatch. Its 8.8 cm KWK-36 was not merely a weapon, it was a statement. The gun's optics were arguably the finest of the war. The TZF-9B binocular sight gave the gunner a crystal-clear, magnified view of the battlefield. He could identify a target, calculate the range, and fire with a first-hit probability that was unnervingly high at distances beyond 1,000 meters. For a Sherman or T-34 crew, engagement was a desperate charge to close the range, hoping to get within 500 meters or less for a flank shot. For the Tiger crew, it was a methodical process of elimination. A distant puff of dust on the horizon would stabilize in the crosshairs. A single, resounding crash would echo across the field, and often that was the end of the encounter. The Tiger didn't just destroy tanks, it annihilated them. The kinetic energy of the 8.8 cm shell could rip a turret clean off its ring, or ignite ammunition in a cataclysmic explosion that left little more Then a burning hull, this psychological impact, the dread of being under fire from an enemy you could not see or effectively engage, was a weapon in itself, paralyzing Allied advances and sowing chaos in armored formations. To be assigned to a Tiger was to join an elite, the Schwer Panzerabteilungen Heavy. Tank battalions were not standard panzer divisions, they were fire brigades held in reserve and shuttled to the most critical sectors of the front. The crews were hand-picked, often veterans of earlier campaigns in France and Russia. They lived and fought inside a mobile steel citadel that weighed over 55 tons. The interior was a cramped, dark world of oily metal, ready ammunition, and complex machinery. The five-man crew, commander, gunner, loader, driver, and radio operator, operated as a single, highly trained organism. There was a profound sense of confidence, of being inside the best protected vehicle on the battlefield. A well-known anecdote from the Eastern Front describes a Tiger returning from combat with over 200 hits from 45 and 76 guns. Not a single round had penetrated its frontal armor. This bred a unique psychology, feeling of near invulnerability, but this confidence was tempered by intimate knowledge of their machine's flaws. They knew the grinding strain of the final drives, the immense fuel consumption, the terrifying vulnerability when the complex, interleaved road wheels clogged with frozen mud. They were an elite, but they were an elite acutely aware that their greatest enemy was not Soviet tanks, but mechanical failure and an empty fuel gauge. The view from the other side of the gun sight was one of pure horror. The first encounters with the Tiger created a phenomenon the British called Tiger fear. Official Allied directives like the U.S. War Department's tank data bulletins were blunt in their assessment. Engaging a Tiger frontally with a standard 75 Sherman was tantamount to suicide. The only prescribed tactics were flanking maneuvers, calling in artillery or air strikes, or using numerical superiority, often at a cost of 5 or more Shermans for every Tiger destroyed. Soviet tankers developed the hug tactic, using their superior numbers and mobility to rush the Tiger, getting so close it could not depress its main gun to fire while other tanks attacked its thinner side and rear armor. But getting that close was a blood-soaked lottery. After-action reports from battles like Villers-Bocage, Normandy, or the fields of Kursk are filled with desperate accounts. Shot after shot bounced off. It was like throwing peas at a monster. The Tiger's psychological impact often outweighed its physical presence. Every unidentified German tank became a Tiger. In the eyes of a frightened crew, this terror was a tangible strategic asset for the Germans, one that could slow advances, disrupt attacks, and force the Allies to commit resources far beyond what was actually required. This profound disparity between the Tiger's battlefield aura and its underlying mechanical fragility defines the next critical angles of its story. Beneath the Tiger's imposing exterior lay a machine pushed to its absolute limits, and often beyond. The core of the problem was weight. At over 55 tons, the Tiger was a colossus that strained every component designed to move it. The Maybach HL 230P45 V12 engine, while powerful, was chronically overworked. It produced roughly 12 horsepower per ton, a dismal ratio that condemned the Tiger to a top speed of just 28 miles per hour on a good road and a crawling pace of 10-12 mph cross-country. This lack of power and agility made it a poor vehicle for the rapid counterattacks and fluid maneuvers that characterized German tactical doctrine. But the true mechanical demons resided in the drivetrain, the final drives, the complex gears that transferred power from the transmission to the tracks were critically under-engineered for the tanks. They were prone to catastrophic failure, often lasting less than 100 miles in demanding conditions. A broken final drive did not merely disable the tank, it required a Herculean maintenance effort, often involving the removal of the front hull armor to access the component, a task that could take a skilled crew half a day under ideal conditions. Then there was the suspension. The interleaved road wheels, while providing an exceptionally smooth ride, were a maintenance nightmare. In the Russian winter, mud and snow would pack solidly between the overlapping wheels, freezing overnight into concrete hard blocks that could immobilize the vehicle entirely, replacing an inner road wheel required the removal of up to 9 other wheels first. This design, intended to solve the problem of ground pressure, created a crippling vulnerability to the very environment in which the Tiger was meant to fight. Breakdowns were not a possibility. They were a statistical certainty. The average lifespan of a Tiger between major overhauls was staggeringly low. For every Tiger lost in combat, others were abandoned and destroyed by their own crews simply because they could not be recovered or repaired. The beast was powerful, but it was also sickly, constantly in need of care it could rarely receive. A tank does not fight on armor and ammunition alone. It runs on fuel, spare parts, and transportation. The Tiger's existence was a constant, desperate battle against arithmetic. Its fuel consumption was prodigious. On the road, it might manage 0.6 miles per gallon. Cross-country, that figure could plummet to 0.25 miles per gallon. A single company of 14 Tigers on the move could consume over 2,200 gallons of fuel to travel just 60 miles. This placed an unimaginable strain on the Wehrmacht's already overstretched and inefficient supply system. The German army, for all its tactical brilliance, never fully mechanized its logistics. It still relied heavily on horses and captured vehicles. Fuel had to be transported from depots in Germany and Romania by train, then transferred to trucks which were themselves scarce and fuel-hungry. These convoys were prime targets for partisan attacks in Allied aircraft. When the trucks could get no closer, the final leg of the journey often fell to the most primitive means imaginable, fuel cans carried by hand or loaded onto horse-drawn carts, and in the most desperate, symbolic circumstances, on the backs of donkeys. The image is almost surreal. The pinnacle of German industrial might, the 55-ton Tiger, rendered inert and waiting for its lifeblood to be delivered by a method unchanged for millennia. This logistical chain was a fragile thread, constantly on the verge of snapping. Offensives were delayed, tactical victories were squandered, and entire battalions were immobilized not by enemy action, but by empty fuel tanks. The Tiger was not just a tank. It was a black hole for resources, consuming fuel, spare parts, and maintenance hours at a rate that the German war economy could not sustain. Its very strength was its systemic weakness, a voracious appetite that its own body could not satisfy. This inherent contradiction between unparalleled tactical power and profound strategic vulnerability was a tension that could not hold forever. It was a pressure cooker waiting to explode, and the crucible where it would finally burst was the vast rolling terrain of Kursk. This brings us to the climax, the turning point where the legend of the Tiger met the unyielding reality of total war. July 12, 1943. The fields near Prokhorovka are a vast, sun-baked killing ground. Operation Citadel, the German offensive to pinch off the Kursk salient, has been raging. For a week, the element of surprise is long gone. The Soviets knew they were coming and have constructed the most formidable defensive network in history for the Tigers. Of the 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler, the advance has been a brutal, grinding affair. They have punched through minefields, survived artillery barrages, and destroyed dozens of Soviet tanks, but the resistance has been unrelenting. On this morning, they form the spearhead of a final, desperate push to break through to the town of Prokhorovka. As the morning mist burns away, they face not just a line of defense, but a tidal wave of Soviet steel. The 5th Guards Tank Army, under General Pavel Rotmistrov, has been ordered to counterattack. What follows is not the clean, long-range duels the Tiger was built for. It is a close-quarters brawl of apocalyptic proportions. Hundreds of T-34s with their diesel engines roaring charge across the open ground, closing the distance at maximum speed. They are aiming for the hug, to get inside the Tiger's effective kill zone and strike its flanks. The Tigers, their 88 guns roaring, begin to exact a terrible toll. A T-34 erupts into flame, then another. The air fills with the smell of burning fuel and cordite, the screams of tearing metal. But the Soviet tanks keep coming, swarming around the German giants. A T-34, its track shot off, continues to fire its main gun until a final round silences it. Another rams a Tiger, hoping to jam its turret ring. The battlefield descends into chaos, a swirling, close-range melee where the Tigers' technological advantages are brutally neutralized. By day's end, the field at Prokhorovka is a graveyard of over 300 Soviet tanks, many of them destroyed by the Tigers and the supporting Panzer IVs, in a purely tactical sense. The German heavy tank battalions have inflicted a lopsided defeat, but this is the heart of the Pyrrhic victory. The Tigers have not broken through, the German offensive has been halted, bled white by the sheer depth of Soviet defenses and their willingness to accept staggering losses. The Tiger, for all its individual kills, cannot overcome the strategic reality. It is too few in number, too slow to exploit fleeting opportunities, and too mechanically fragile to sustain such intense combat. Many of the destroyed Tigers are not victims of enemy guns, but of broken final drives and overheated engines. Abandoned on the field because recovery under fire is impossible, the myth of the Tiger's invincibility remains intact for the common soldier, but for the German high command, the truth is clear at Kursk. They have lost their best tanks and their most experienced crews in an offensive that has achieved nothing. The strategic initiative on the Eastern Front has passed irrevocably to the Soviet Union. The failure at Kursk forced a fundamental shift in the German war machine. From the aggressor to the besieged, the Tiger's role was about to change from the spearhead of blitzkrieg to a mobile, but increasingly static, pillbox in a long and bloody retreat. The long, bloody road back to Germany began in the summer of 1943. The Tiger was now forced to fight a war for which it was profoundly ill-suited, a war of maneuver, retreat, and desperate defense. In Italy, the narrow mountain roads and fragile bridges became death traps. The Tiger's immense weight made it a liability. A single breakdown on a narrow pass could halt an entire division's retreat for hours. The soft, waterlogged ground of the Italian lowlands, like the infamous Pontine marshes, became a quagmire that could swallow the behemoth whole. Here, the Tiger was not a hunter but a stranded whale, desperately vulnerable to artillery spotters and fighter bombers. Its legendary gun was often reduced to firing at distant, fleeting targets of opportunity. Its power wasted in a campaign defined by terrain and attrition. Then came Normandy, June 1944. The Bocage country, a dense patchwork of small fields, towering hedgerows, and sunken lanes, was the antithesis of the open Russian steppes. Engagement ranges were often less than 100 meters, a Tiger's greatest advantage. Its long-range killing power was nullified. In the close confines of the hedgerows, it was blind and cumbersome. Shermans, notably the upgunned Fireflies, with their potent 17-pounders and agile infantry armed with bazookas and PIATs, could lie in ambush, striking at the Tiger's flanks from point-blank range. The sound of a Tiger's engine grinding through a narrow lane was a signal for every Allied soldier in the vicinity to call in artillery or prepare an ambush. The psychological terror the Tiger once inspired was now tempered by hard-learned tactics and the knowledge that it was not invincible. The true turning point for the Tiger, however, was not a single battle, but a relentless, systemic collapse. The Allied strategic bombing campaign was systematically dismantling the German war economy. Fuel production plummeted, the factories producing the specialized steel for its armor and the complex parts for its transmission were targeted. Spare parts became almost non-existent. Tigers were increasingly cannibalized to keep a handful of others running. The elite heavy battalions, once the fire brigades of the front, were now scattered, isolated, and perpetually starved of the resources needed to function. A Tiger immobilized by a broken final drive was no longer a tank awaiting repair. It was a static pillbox until its ammunition ran out, at which point it was blown up by its own crew. The beast was being systematically strangled, not by enemy tanks but by a severed supply line and the overwhelming weight of Allied industrial production. Its final battles in the Ardennes and around Berlin in 1945 were not the glorious last stands of a legend, but the death spasms of a weapon system whose time had passed, fighting on fumes and sheer desperation. The long retreat ended in silence, not with a bang, but with the sputtering cough of an empty fuel tank. The battlefield fell quiet, leaving only the grim statistical ledger of the aftermath to be tallied. The ledger of the Tiger tank is a study in stark, unforgiving numbers. From August 1942, Until August 1944, German industry managed to produce just 1,347 Tiger I tanks. To put this in perspective, the United States built over 49,000 M4 Sherman tanks. The Soviet Union produced over 84,000 T-34s. This disparity speaks not of quality, but of philosophy. The Allied approach was one of mass production, reliability, and strategic depth. The German approach, epitomized by the Tiger, was one of exquisite, complex, and ultimately unsustainable quality. The cost of a single Tiger was approximately 250,000 Reichsmarks. It required over 300,000 man-hours to build. A Sherman, by contrast, cost about $50,000 USD, around 100,000 RM, and could be built in a fraction of the time. The German war economy was effectively spending the resources for 2.5 Panzer IVs, a perfectly capable and more numerous battle tank, to field one Tiger. The loss ratios, often cited to prove the Tiger's superiority, are equally revealing, but not in the way myth might suggest. It is true that individual Tigers and their crews achieved staggering kill counts. SS Oberscharführer Michael Wittmann's famous rampage at Villers-Bocage is a prime example. Schwer Panzerabteilung 503 claimed over 1,600 enemy tanks for the loss of just 252 of its own Tigers throughout the war, a kill ratio of nearly 7:1, but these numbers are deceptive. They do not account for the Tigers abandoned and destroyed by their own crews due to mechanical failure or lack of fuel. Losses that never appear in combat reports. More importantly, they ignore the strategic context. Destroying 5 Shermans to lose 1 Tiger was a trade Germany could not win. The United States could replace those 5 Shermans in a matter of weeks. Germany could not replace that 1 Tiger for months, if at all. The Tiger was a tactical asset that consumed strategic-level resources. Every railway car carrying a single Tiger to the front was a car not carrying 10 truckloads of fuel, ammunition, or spare parts for the entire army. The program was a net drain on the German war effort, a magnificent solution to a tactical problem that exacerbated a fatal strategic weakness. The true cost was measured not in Reichsmarks, but in the gradual erosion of the Schwer Panzerabteilungen themselves. By the end of 1944, these elite units were shadows of their former selves, operating a handful of tanks, constantly rotating between fronts and forever waiting for the fuel and parts that would never arrive in sufficient quantity. The Tiger did not lose the war for Germany, but its existence and the resources it consumed undoubtedly helped to shorten it. This grim accounting leads to the final, symbolic fate of the individual battalions and the legacy they left behind, a legacy not just of steel and firepower, but of a fundamentally flawed doctrine. By the spring of 1945, the Schwer Panzerabteilungen were phantoms of their former might. The final battles were not the grand armored clashes of 1943, but brutal street-by-street struggles in cities like Berlin, Budapest, and Silo Heights. Here, the Tiger, designed for open-field dominance, was at its most vulnerable. Its long gun was ill-suited for close-quarters fighting. Its immense weight could collapse streets and bridges. Its thin roof armor was exposed to plunging fire from artillery and handheld anti-tank weapons like the Panzerfaust. The final photographs of these behemoths tell a consistent story: immobilized hulks, tracks blown off, abandoned in city squares or rural ditches, their crews having used their last rounds of ammunition before scuttling them with a single internal explosive charge. The elite training, the camaraderie, the tactical brilliance, all were rendered meaningless by the sheer, overwhelming tide of the Red Army and the Western Allies. The Tiger's ultimate legacy is that of a symbol. It represented the pinnacle of German engineering and the terrifying proficiency of its panzer troops, but more profoundly, it symbolized a critical flaw in the German military and industrial doctrine, the pursuit of qualitative overmatch at the total expense of quantitative and logistical reality. This was a philosophy championed by Hitler himself, who was consistently seduced by the idea of war-winning wonder weapons: the Tiger, the Panther, the King Tiger, the Me-262 jet. All were technological marvels, but all were produced in insufficient numbers, with crippling reliability issues, and without the sustainable infrastructure to support them. They were tactical triumphs and strategic failures. The Tiger was a magnificent answer to the question of how to kill enemy tanks, but it was a catastrophic answer to the questions of how to win a war of production and logistics. It was a weapon for a short, sharp war of conquest, utterly unsuited for the long, grinding war of attrition that the conflict became. In the end, the Tiger's story is perfectly encapsulated by its own operational records. Report from the 508th Heavy Panzer Battalion in Italy in 1944 is starkly illustrative. Of the battalion's complement of Tigers, more were lost to mechanical breakdowns and being abandoned during retreats than to direct enemy fire. They were not defeated in duels. They were simply left behind, their fuel tanks dry, their final drives shattered, their crews melting away into the retreating columns of infantry. The beast was not slain, it was starved, and it collapsed under its own immense weight. This final, quiet dissolution of a legend brings us to a moment of reflection, to consider what the story of the Tiger means beyond the battlefields and the statistics. The story of the Tiger tank is not merely a tale of a machine of war, it is a permanent lesson in the limits of technology when divorced from the practical realities of strategy and scale. It stands as a monument to human ingenuity and a grave for the hubris that so often accompanies it. German engineers, working under immense pressure, created a weapon that could dominate any single moment of combat, a masterpiece of focused, destructive power. Yet in doing so, they built a system that was fundamentally unsustainable, a microcosm of the Nazi war effort itself, brilliantly aggressive, tactically innovative, but ultimately fragile, resource-starved, and strategically bankrupt. The Tiger's true enemy was not the T-34 or the Sherman, formidable as they were. Its enemy was arithmetic. It was the relentless, grinding calculus of industrial production, of fuel consumption, of railway capacity. It was a weapon that demanded a perfect, stable front, predictable supply lines, and time for meticulous maintenance, luxuries that Germany had lost by the time it first saw battle, the empty fuel canister lying in the mud. Next to an abandoned Tiger is the most potent symbol of its failure. It represents the moment when a theoretical advantage collides with the unyielding wall of reality. Today, the few surviving Tigers, silent and immobile in museums around the world, command awe and respect. They are testaments to the engineering ambition of their creators and the courage or desperation of the crews who man them. But their lasting legacy is a warning. A weapon, no matter how powerful, is only as effective as the system that fields, fuels, and sustains it. The Tiger was a beast of mythical proportions. But it was a beast chained to a reality it could not overcome, a colossus brought to its knees not by a superior foe, but by the simple, profound absence of the fuel that gave it life.